Okay, everyone. We have just about a minute or so. Welcome, welcome. Glad to see all of you here this morning. You should be able to see my screen and you'll be able to see Dr. Watson's screen. I did put it on focus mode so you can just have that zoom in of him as he's speaking. That should be working on your computer. And you just have a few minutes. I'm gonna give us those few minutes for people to come into the room. All right, it is 10 o'clock. Okay, so good morning, everyone. I am Stephanie Burris, as you know, your professional growth coordinator. And today we are here for a very special session and a long overdue conversation for us. The workshop topic today is AI's implications in higher education. We have joining us Dr. Edward Watson. He will be presenting information and doing a little Q&A with us at the end today. Dr. Watson is going to tell you about himself, but he's also the co-author of a book called Teaching with AI with his partner, Jose Antonio Watson, and Dr. Watson wrote that book. I just want to let you know that I have 25 copies of his book, and I am planning to share those books with all of you who wish to go from this session into, and anyone else on our campus who wants to go into a community of practice over the next 2 months, where we're going to meet 3 times and talk about sections of the book each time we meet and continue to process AI and its impact on higher ed and what we're going to do on our campus. So look for that in the announcements, and hopefully you'll plan to join us. And once you sign up, I'll get a book to you. So without any further ado, I'm going to now introduce and let him take the floor, Dr. Edward Watson. I think he likes to be called Eddie.
Yeah, Eddie somehow made it out of kindergarten with that nickname, and I guess I'm going to ride it till the end. Stephanie, thank you so much for the invitation to come and chat with your colleagues about, well, my book and just sort of the landscape right now for higher education regarding AI. I'm the Vice President for Digital Innovation at AAC&U, so really I kind of focus on issues associated with technology and teaching and learning and student success and the like for the association. Before that, I was the director of the Center for Teaching and Learning at the University of Georgia. And then before that, did faculty development at Virginia Tech. So that's very much been my space across my career. But I really kind of come to technology from the teaching and learning space. You know, I don't see myself as a techno-positivist. I really kind of begin with notions of what do we need to do to help students learn. And that's really been the focus of my career. But AI certainly is taking up a lot of space within the teaching and learning and higher ed landscape these days. And I kind of came to investigate AI quite early. I think, like probably many of you, I have some people in my life that are always bringing me the latest and greatest. And probably my favorite person that does that is my son, Carter. Here's a photo of him. He always he brings things with excitement, and he always prefaces it with, hey, Dad, this is going to change your life. I got to show you something. And a good example of that is he took me to the Apple store to try out the Apple Vision Pro, put on that headset. And I found it to not be life-changing. I found it to be like 87 pounds, and it was really exhausting to have on my head for like 15 minutes. And then you're supposed to type in the air in front of you. And I was like, yeah, this isn't going to change my life. But Carter came home from college in December of 2022 and said, hey, Dad, have you heard of ChatGPT? And I said, I've heard of it. And he said, have you tried it yet? And I said, no. And he said, well, this is going to change your life. And I'm like, okay, here we go again. But we sit down at the kitchen table and he says, so what do you ask your students when you're teaching? And I said, what do you mean, like an assignment? And he said, yeah. And so I kind of explained an assignment that I've given to students for years and years. And he was sort of taking notes in a web browser. And then he read it back to me. He says, does that kind of get to the crux of it? And I said, yeah, that's pretty much it. And then he hit return. And as I saw the text sort of scrolling up on the screen, it's now in family lore that the next words out of my mouth were, oh no, because I instantly saw the academic integrity challenges that this was going to bring forward for higher education. But I spent a lot more time that afternoon playing and working with AI. And I guess I quickly came to the realization that maybe Carter was right this time, that this is going to be a significant change for not only higher education, but the world writ large. So, how is AI changing things and changing higher education? Well, I mean, first, I believe that AI is definitely changing the world of work, but I would go a step further to say that it's actually going to impact the way that we think, the way that we approach problems, the way that we consider partnering with our own AI assistant to complete tasks, to brainstorm, to develop course materials, to revise assignments, to better understand health results from tests, to fix something in your car, to figuring out how you might do a specific kind of task on your computer. AI is quickly serving that kind of space and role for many of us. And I think ultimately we're going to see that almost all of us will be using AI in the very near future. I think AI is very much changing the very definition of what is average. I think that what we may have considered average work previously because of the opportunities that are provided by AI, that maybe the expectation for what used to be average is no longer average. That's below average, given that average work with the assistance of AI might be better than just the work we might do ourselves or the work that AI might produce when prompted. I think AI is also changing creativity. So if we look back to sort of like the start of the World Wide Web, we saw a significant shift when the web came about. I mean, prior to the web, information was, well, it was fairly scarce to find, but when you found it, it was fairly reliable. So you go to a bookstore, you go to the library, you read it in a journal, those were our sources of new information. We pretty much could depend on what we find. But with the launch of the World Wide Web, and of course, social media a decade after that in the early 2000s, because there's a plethora of information. Now, information is everywhere, but it's far less reliable than it used to be. And so that's one reason why in a lot of freshman comp classes or libraries and on many institutions, campuses are offering courses in information literacy or modules on information literacy, that we should indeed question the things that we find online, try to triangulate sources, find multiple sources that have that provide the same answer, so that we can have some sense of that you depend or that you have confidence in that data source. And so I think those same issues around information literacy certainly exist within the AI space, but I think that it's not just about access to knowledge and then what we do with it, but now we're finding ourselves partnering with AI and they're actually helping us. The technologies are actually helping us complete tasks and to do work and to think about our next steps. So just some examples from the world of work that sort of underscore this. I mean, radiology and radiologists, their approach has been, forever to just, you get the scan and then you kind of look at every pixel and then you try to see if there's anything troubling in there, like a tumor or a cancer or the like. Well, now AI is partnering with radiologists to do the first view of the scan. And, it'll look over, a scan of like a lung or a kidney or whatever it might be. And then it will put a little red box around something that the AI finds troubling, and the next step is that it goes to the radiologist. The radiologist should still look at everything, but there's a little bit of coaching, like, hey, well, there's something here that's really troubling. Still do your usual scan, but focus on this area. And as a result of this partnership with AI, we're now detecting 20% more cancers. And of course, often at the early stages, and that's incredibly important. That's how you have the best health outcomes is if you catch things like cancer early. I had a really interesting experience recently with my primary care physician. I've been going to the same doctor now for well over 20 years. Our kids were in school together. We're about the same age, and we were always on like the soccer sidelines together and whatever. But going to see him, there was always a very predictable rhythm. He would come in and he would spend 30 seconds speaking very earnestly to me. Hey, Eddie, how are you doing? How are the kids? How's Carter? Those kinds of things. And then he would sit down and he would roll in this cart and he would open up his laptop and then he would start to type. And I think probably many of us have that experience where we go to see our physician and there's just a lot of typing and not too much eye contact. Well, in March, I go to see him. He rolls in like usual. He does his earnest little thing with me, opens up his laptop, and then he hits return, and then he turns to me, and then we start having a conversation. And about 4 minutes in, I wave my arms and I say, wait a second, something's very different here. Why are we sort of having this conversation? And he says, well, I've got a technology that's listening to our conversation. It's taking notes and it's actually putting in its best guess at appropriate insurance codes for things. And then he said his role is at the conclusion, he'll then kind of read the notes back to me and he'll make edits and changes. And he also makes changes to insurance codes because he knows what, will get kicked back in different contexts. So, his expert knowledge is needed to make sure the novice work completed by the AI is done well. But the tagline for this technology is see the patient, not the technology. And that's exactly what I experienced was in the 15 minutes that I was with him, instead of him spending maybe 13 minutes with his eyes on the screen, it was more like, 2/3 of the time his eyes were on me. It gave me flashbacks to when I was 4 and had chicken pox, and Dr. Hall when I was just a little kid, just talking to me and having sort of, bedside manner where I was the focus of attention. So this seems like, maybe a positive outcome, a couple of positive outcomes from the world of healthcare. But there's other places where we're finding generative AI tools finding a home, like within the world of work of law. There's a technology. It costs $400 a month as a subscription for a law office. Its tagline is, so you can do more of what AI can't. I was actually talking to a senior vice president at Rutgers University a couple of months back. And he oversees, well, a lot of things, but the office that has all of the legal, contracting stuff and all that stuff, all of the lawyers that are employees at Rutgers report to him. And he said that he has long known that his lawyers, like when reviewing contracts, they're really good at catching errors. They're not so good at catching things that are missing. And that this new AI tool is actually good at both. So now their workflow has really changed significantly. The junior lawyers that used to be looking at a lot of contracts and contract law and editing and making changes to contracts. Well, now that first pass is completed by the AI, and the AI is catching things that are missing. And so then the junior lawyers then just accept changes, make some additional edits. There's a partnership there for sure. But instead of maybe reviewing a contract taking, 2 or 3 hours, it might just take them like 15 to 30 minutes. So as a result, those junior lawyer positions have shifted, where now they're more client facing and there's more interaction back and forth sort of, with those that are pursuing agreements with the university, whether it's, IT procurement or maybe it's a gift or a grant from a foundation. But now they're sort of being more forward thinking and forward leaning into the human side of things. And they're getting contracts through much more quickly than they ever did before, thanks to the adoption of AI. Though I do think this raises an interesting challenge likely for us going forward. If we find that AI is doing some of the work associated with, junior level work, well, how will we ever get like senior lawyers if they don't spend 10 years doing case law or contracts and the like? So you develop that broad base of expertise where you can then, move forward and move to the next levels in your career. This could create some challenges within the workforce where, people aren't doing that kind of work and then developing that broad skill set that would be needed. So that might be something that we see as a challenge in the years ahead. Another example of where we're seeing generative AI at use is within the customer service world. Um, I do not enjoy calling customer service lines. In fact, I had an experience just this morning that was frustrating. I got locked out of my online banking, and then I call the number that I had to call, and then the tree had 7 options, and none of them were the options that I needed. Anyways, I think we've all had those kinds of experiences. So there's a new technology. It's an AI technology that actually resides in the headset of the customer service representative. And it's listening while they're interacting with the customer. And it will say things like, this customer seems upset. Attempt to de-escalate. So that kind of coaching on the job has been found really useful for new employees. In fact, it's improved employee retention because they get coaching and assistance in the midst of maybe some of the more challenging things that might lead some people to say, okay, I can't be in this career. There's too much intensity for me. So it's actually improving employee retention. Customer sentiment has improved as a result of having generative AI in the headset. There's fewer requests for, let me talk to your manager kind of thing. And they're actually resolving more cases per hour with the assistance of the AI. So one thing to note is AI isn't doing the work for us. Rather, it's becoming a collaborator with us. We're still doing the last steps, like whatever we might put forward as a contract. Humans are still the person making those final decisions. There's still the customer service representative who's having the conversation is making decisions. But I think that's what we're going to see is more and more partnerships just like that. Another example beyond the world of language is the way that Google is now handling bug fixes for its own products. Google has a generative AI tool called Gemini, and Gemini is they're using Gemini to help with bug fixes. So it used to be a process where you would assign the bug fix to a junior programmer and they would fix it and then they'd send it to quality assurance and then it would be tested there. And then if it fixed the bug and didn't break anything, it would then go to production. Well, now the process is you still assign it to a junior programmer, but the junior programmer asks Gemini to create the computer code to fix this bug. They then test it and then they send it to QA. So they're able to actually get it to quality assurance more quickly than in the past. And now more of the bug fixes are being accepted and then moved into production than before. So I guess in my less cynical moments, I guess I'm kind of hopeful that AI is actually going to make all of us happier, that there's probably certain kinds of tasks that we don't necessarily enjoy doing or that provide us with a bit of fatigue. And so to have an AI assistant that can, help us move things forward more quickly and then to get on to other things that we maybe care more about, like more times with our students or more time preparing for our classes or more time with our family. That I think is maybe the one possible future for us. I mean, just as an example of why I think this might be the case is, I taught for 20 years and depending on class sizes, some springs in February, March, April, I would receive upwards of 45 or 50 requests from students to write letters of recommendation for maybe grad school or a letter for out there on the job. And I feel like we do so much for our students. The last 1% of the work that we can do is to provide them with that letter to help them get the job to move on later in their career. And so I care a lot about that work, but 45 to 50 letters, in the span of like 4 weeks, that's, for me, it would take me maybe 45 minutes to write a good letter. And I already have a template that I would use, but still, there's so many things that you have to do to put together a letterhead and all the things that you do. And I have found that I would usually ask students to provide me with, what 3 things would you like for me to highlight in this letter? So what are your 3 strengths? What do you want me to highlight thinking about the job that you're applying for? And that helps kind of guide me. I feel like, whether I'm writing a letter for a faculty member pursuing a teaching award or a grant, or whether it's a student, the thing that I feel like I bring to it that I like is the paragraph that's the personal story. oh, I observed this faculty member teach, and I remember they did this in the classroom, and this was so effective, and that's why I feel strongly to recommend them for this new teaching role or whatever it might be. That kind of thing I would add in. Well, now with AI, I can still ask students for, hey, what are three things? And then ask AI to, for this student, for this job at this company, write a letter of recommendation highlighting these three strengths. Then I would get a draft. And then I would add my personal story paragraph and, of course, edit the whole thing and put it on my letterhead. But what may have taken me 45 minutes in the past now maybe takes 10 to 12 minutes to complete. It's a very different kind of task. And so I feel like I'm still producing the same kind of quality, the same kind of personal touch, but it's made me happier. I can get through some of those kind of tedious tasks more quickly with the partnership of AI. So those were a lot of sort of specific examples from a number of different industries. But as we think about the world of work and preparing our students for the world of work, how have things shifted in the last year? So there was a research study at Stanford University that looked at the federal job index and just sort of look at the collection of tasks that are represented in those 961 job descriptions within the federal job index. And they concluded that every last one of those jobs had at least one task that AI could do better today. And this was actually just a little bit less than a year ago. So at that time, there was a recognition that, wow, at least in the federal job index, every job could be, um, efficiencies could be improved with the addition of leveraging AI. Late this past 2023, late this past calendar year, Amazon World Services released a large-scale employer survey where they surveyed employers and from every business sector, so not just IT, but also finance and human resources and healthcare and on down the line. And at that time, 93% of employers said that they expected to be using generative AI within their workplace within the next 5 years. Many had already adopted it, but they all were seeing, wow, yeah, we really see a place for this. One thing that they also noted was that they were recognizing a broad AI skills gap within the current workforce population. In other words, they were having trouble finding people with the skills they needed around AI to hire to come work for them. But what they also noted was as they think about the sort of job readiness landscape, they saw higher education, they saw us as the logical solution to this AI skills gap. And so I find that really important, I think, for a number of different reasons, that higher ed is still seen as the logical place for workforce development. But there are a number of different sort of competitors that have come out on the landscape, including Amazon and Microsoft and others that have training opportunities, micro credentials or certificates or certifications for AI skills, as well as a range of other skills as well. So we have those out there that are kind of nibbling at our heels, might be one way to think about it. In trying to take some of the work that we have historically done. But it's good that most of the American employment world still sees higher ed as essential to solving these kinds of workforce, these kinds of skill challenges. There was a survey just from this past May, another large-scale employee survey from Microsoft and LinkedIn, and they found that at that time, so in May, there were about 75% of people were already using AI at work, again, across all business sectors. What was really intriguing about that is that number had doubled from 6 months earlier. So the rate of adoption of AI by employees has been quite significant. And I was anticipating as I got into the study to see, significant diversity among, depending on your age. Like those in the 20s are probably, it's probably 100% of those folks, and maybe those in their 50s and 60s, maybe it's more like 10% or 20%. But actually, it was a much tighter band around the mean of 75%. It's about 85% if you're in your 20s and 30s are using AI in the world of work. It's about 65% if you're older in the world of work. They've also found a place for AI in their work. So as I think about those that are entering their last year of college right now. They're coming to our campus last month and maybe a little bit now. Um, yeah, what's the stat likely to be when they leave our campus and join the world of work? Is it 75%, maybe more like 85%, maybe 90%? Certainly, I don't think it's going to be 100% come May of 2025. But I think we can anticipate that the world of work is going to increasingly and in a continuing fashion adopt AI for a variety of different tasks. Again, not necessarily replacing jobs, rather augmenting jobs or becoming a partner with employees in the work of their position. Additionally, one thing noted in that Amazon World Services survey was that, whenever a business does find somebody that has the range of skills that they need, of course, they need expertise within the discipline and then a range of other skills like, being able to write well and think well and all the things that employers now say that they're looking for, those with teamwork skills. But if they also find someone that has those skills and AI skills, they see that they're paying them more, a third more or even more, depending on the field. I think part of this, the notion of putting golden handcuffs on those employees, pay them so that you don't lose them because, they're a bit of a unicorn at that time. And how are we going to refill that position? So those with AI skills are indeed finding that they're making more as a result of having that additional skill set. Amazon World Services also asked, I think, a very astute question. They said, okay, so what do you need to know? I mean, what skills do you need to possess to be able to use AI well? And what I guess I really loved about the findings is that these are things that we teach in higher ed. This is our bread and butter. We teach critical thinking. We teach problem solving. We teach creative thinking, creative design. We teach a range of technical skills. We also teach ethics. And you can see the other things listed here: communication, math, teamwork, management. Writing was the least reported skill that employers thought was needed to use AI well. I think over time, as people work with AI more, we're going to see writing rise on that list. I think it's going to move higher up on that list, partially because you need a diverse writing skill set to work with AI. There's a lot of editing, and you have to think about voice and audience, things that you've always had to think about, but also have to look for, issues of, whether or not there are hallucinations in there and false information. It's a broader writing skill set. Well, Carmen, I see your hand up. Please unmute and ask your question.
I just wanted to say this is really amazing. I just had a conversation with a student. I teach research methods, and you get to choose your research topic. And his topic is AI causing anxiety for college students in regard to job replacement. And he
Yes.
wants to study that. So I'm sitting here thinking, okay, getting some tools. And I can't wait to show him some of this data. You're presenting it in a way to maybe reduce some of that anxiety, but because he has that, and so I'm hopeful as the way you have presented it, that perhaps it could be a tool to enhance his skills rather than replace him. So it was really a fruitful conversation about whether or not there was value in the degree if AI was coming for those intended positions. But this is great. That's what I wanted to say. It's very relevant right now, even for students looking at their future
Well,
outcomes. So thanks.
thank you for the feedback. And I think that the first workshop that I did on teaching and learning and AI was at one of our conferences at AAC&U. And afterwards, I had a close colleague come up who hadn't really engaged with the AI space yet. She's now a provost, but at that time she was a dean. And she came up and she said, "This was great. I'm terrified." And I'm like, well, that's not the outcome I wanted. So I've definitely sort of adjusted the message to hopefully where people sort of like will understand what's really happening, but then also feel empowered by it. We did a lot of student focus grouping for the book, and we had one group where there was people that had graduated recently, and it did seem like the greatest anxiety. Of course, it was a very small group, but the greatest anxiety seemed to be with those that had just graduated because they received no training or education regarding AI. They're now in a workplace where they're those older than them that are ahead of them in skills within that space. So I guess one thing that I'm really hoping, I guess is sort of my advocation at the moment is thinking about those that are going to leave our institutions with a degree in May of 2025, and that's 8 months from now. What can we do within our curriculum and our courses to prepare, especially those students who this is their last chance within the education sphere to gain the skills that they need to then be able to hit that job market successfully? So I guess, what are those skills? That might be the question, like what might we build into our curriculum? And I have a generalized model of AI literacy. So what should we be teaching our students? And really before they come to AI in the first place, there's a range of skills we need to impress upon them. I think, sort of see it like a tennis match. Like before you even come to the game, before you hit your first prompt across the net to AI, you need to, number one, understand fundamentally what that relationship is that you have with AI. And that AI is not replacing you, it's not doing work for you, rather it's a collaboration. And ultimately, your lead author, anything that comes forward from your work with AI, if there's anything faulty in it or anything that's misleading, you can't say, well, the AI did. You own it. You're the one who published that, or you put out that press release, or you sent that email. So there's a really significant role for each of us in every one of our collaborations with AI. So that should be the orientation coming to it. I'm working with it. I'm its boss. It's my novice assistant, but it can do some great things quickly. But I realize I have to double check everything. So that's one thing we need to impress upon students. Also, the AI world isn't monolithic. There's a number of different tools out there, and some of them have different strengths and weaknesses. So we need to know, when we might use one tool over another and why. And I think we do want more than one tool in our toolbox. Um, um, Someone had asked in the chat room, I saw it pop up, can we get the slides right now? Probably not right now. But I can certainly share them with Stephanie, and she can feel empowered to share with the group. So there's different tools, and then they each have strengths and weaknesses. How do you work around their weaknesses? So kind of like knowing, one tool tends to hallucinate more than another, but because it hallucinates more, it's a better creative partner because it thinks way outside of the box. So those are the kinds of nuances that we need to educate our students around. And then, of course, there's the array of ethical implications of when we shouldn't use AI and why we shouldn't use AI. And then there's other times where not necessarily an issue of ethics, but it's just like, is it a good idea? So if you got back test results from a biopsy, is it good to go to AI and say, hey, can you interpret these results for me and recommend a treatment path forward? That might help you develop some vocabulary, but probably should talk to your doctor or go to the Cleveland Clinic website. So I think helping students understand it's a fallible tool that can be helpful and educative in some of these contexts, but there's times when we shouldn't use it. There's times when it's maybe not a good idea to use it, or certainly not as your sole source of information. And then there's times where, it can be really helpful. So one of the things that you often hear people talk about around AI literacy is just the notion of prompt engineering, like writing good questions, and how do you craft those questions, and what's the scope of questions? You can provide literally a book length of information. You can upload that. You could say, take these student papers from the last 4 semesters and provide me with feedback regarding where they tend to perform the poorest based upon this dimension within the grading rubric. It can do that in seconds and say, yeah, it looks like this is where the students struggle the most. So that might then give you a cue, like this is something that I should focus on more whenever I teach this course again. So there's a lot, good questions give you good results. So there's a lot to teach there around prompt engineering. And again, that's just to get ready to use AI. And then once you begin using it, the ball goes on the other side of the net. There's a whole other skill set that's needed that we really need to be engendering in our students. It's reviewing and evaluating AI-produced content, looking for issues of accuracy, and also recognizing bias. These large language models upon which these generative AI tools are built have evoked large amounts of data from lots of different corners of the World Wide Web, and there's a lot of different opinions on the World Wide Web. So I mean, teaching our students what is bias, why would you want to edit it out? How do you edit it out? How do you make those decisions? You know, that in and of itself is a couple of days of instruction in a course somewhere. And then, of course, once you have this output from AI, well, then you've got to do some writing, some editing work. So there's a different skill set that maybe the freshman writing sequence needs to incorporate, some specific instruction on, editing and what does good editing processing look like. And then, of course, AI is not a web search. You can have a conversation with it. So if you ask it for like 10 ideas and it gives you 10 ideas, you might say, well, can you iterate on idea number 8 that you provided? So it remembers what you asked, it remembers its own answer. And so when you ask that next question, it can then move forward with the knowledge of the previous conversation that has already occurred. So that notion of iterating, there's a skill set associated with that. And then I think ultimately, reminding students, kind of echoing my very first point on this slide, is like, okay, so now you have something that you've created. Do you see your fingerprints on it? Do you see yourself, your contributions in that final product? If you're not present in your collaborations with AI, it's hard for me to imagine that employers would pay someone, I don't know, $35,000 a year to do nothing but the work that AI could do. If it's just about asking a question and then just passing the next thing forward, that's probably not a professional position, So again, we need to engender a mindset, an orientation in our students and really ourselves that AI can help us, but we have to own that process. We have to edit, we have to move things forward. We have to see ourselves in it and to be able to tell others, this is what I did. This is how I've brought this forward. This is how this collaboration worked for me. So just, again, it's about engendering that mindset. So I think that higher ed has a new grand challenge right now. I think that there's this tension regarding how do we actually bring this into our curriculum and our classroom. I mean, there's a couple of different logic paths that take us to two very different places. So one of those logic paths is, wow, okay, so AI can do a lot of the work, especially sort of in our foundational courses that we would be assigning to students. I mean, the academic integrity issues are significant. So that might lead someone to logically conclude, oh, well, we can't bring this into the classroom. We can't use this in our courses. Reasonable logic conclusion. There's also a question about, well, even if a student doesn't cheat, could this diminish learning in my courses? So let's say you give students a writing assignment, they provide it to AI and say, provide me a detailed outline that would equal a 5-page paper. And then the student writes every word and then turns that in. I mean, so they did the writing, but they didn't do any of the struggle associated with, well, what should be in this paper? What should not be in this paper? How should I order this information? What is the flow from one idea to the next? There's a lot of learning that that's required to do the processing to get to an outline. So, that's another reason maybe we want to keep AI out of the classroom, is that it could negatively impact learning. But then we turn to think about the world of work and how rapidly AI has become adopted and what current employees are saying. And at least, regardless of the type of institution one might be at, we would all agree that at least part of the mission of higher education is to prepare students for life beyond graduation, for the world of work. And if you think down that logic path, well, then it demands that we must bring AI into the classroom. So that's really what I want to talk about going forward, is that tension, and how do we negotiate the tension of, like, logically, we need to keep this out of our classroom. Logically, we need to embrace this in our curriculum and bring it into the classroom. How do we negotiate that? What does that look like? And what are some specific strategies that we might employ? So as I move into that discussion, I want to share a bit of an overview of the generative AI world. Again, people kind of talk about it as if it's monolithic, as if there's just like this one thing, generative AI, and then most people think of ChatGPT. They were the first to market. That's the brand we all know. So let's look at this landscape a little bit further. So ChatGPT is a product of OpenAI. That's the parent company. But OpenAI has been invested in by Microsoft to the tune of tens of billions of dollars. So ChatGPT is co-owned by Microsoft. So that's one product out there. But there's competitors. There's Anthropic, and they have a tool called Claude, and Claude is actually my favorite of the AI tools, given how I use it. Like I like writing. I was a double major in English and statistics, so interesting combination there. But I enjoy writing, so I would prefer not to have AI write for me. But as a brainstorming partner, Claude is great. You know, I feel like if I needed a business letter, ChatGPT is where I would go. If I needed a brainstorming partner, like what's 10 great titles for a study abroad program in London, in the Department of English. You know, that would give me a bunch of different great ideas. Google has Gemini, which is a really good tool. It does really well with coding. There's the product from Twitter, Twitter/X, I guess now. It's called Grok. Grok is kind of like that uncle that you really don't like your kids to spend too much time with. It's bias on full display, as you might imagine. A lot of what's in its large language model most likely came from Twitter. And there's a lot of opinions on Twitter. I can't hardly even go in Twitter anymore because there's just a lot of stuff out there. There's a couple others out there as well, but you might be thinking, well, Eddie, you're saying there's 6, but I know of a couple dozen tools out there that I've seen commercials for or that I'm already using, and that's very true. There's a whole other world out there of tools that claim to be generative AI tools, and they indeed are generative AI tools. But let's unpack that a little bit. So, there's all these tools that I have sort of like on the bottom of the screen. ChatGPT created a doorway into its large language model. So the sort of the technical phrase for it is called an open API. And what that allows is if you have a little bit of coding skill and you want to build something that does a very specific task, you can actually plug into ChatGPT's brain, essentially, into its large language model, into ChatGPT itself, and create a product that will do a very specific task. So a good example of that are some of the research, like lit review tools that are out there, like Research Rabbit and Elicit and Consensus. Those tools hit ChatGPT. Like if you ask it for a lit review on a specific topic, it hits ChatGPT and brings back a list. But as we know, ChatGPT hallucinates, a quarter to a third of its citations. They just aren't real or don't exist. So what these other tools do is they hit ChatGPT, they get a list, and then they double check every citation against Semantic Scholar and ensures that those are indeed real. And so then what it provides back to you is a lit review of citations that have been verified. So just an example of a very specific task. Probably some of you have heard of Microsoft Copilot, which is a generative AI tool. It uses entirely in its background, it's using ChatGPT. So it's literally just a different user interface using the exact same tool. There's tools for doing computer coding. There's a range of other kinds of research tools that are out there. There's a number of different writing partners. I mean, Grammarly, if you've used Grammarly before, or if you've encouraged your students to use it, Grammarly has its own AI for like grammar check and spell check. But if you're using Grammarly and you're in like Microsoft Word or whatever, or a Google Doc, you'll see this G that kind of follows you around. If you click the G, one more button will show up and it's a little star. And if you click the star, a new window pops up, and then you can actually ask it to like, hey, I've got this bulleted list. Can you alphabetize the bulleted list? And it'll make that change in the document for you. Or you can just ask it other kinds of questions. Grammarly entirely uses ChatGPT as its generative AI tool. The other tools are coming along with their own open APIs, but if you find a generative AI tool out there that you like, I bet there's a 98% chance that it's using ChatGPT in the background. So that's kind of the landscape right now. But there's another wrinkle to it. Each of these companies is trying to develop a business model. They need income. So they have free versions of their tools, and then they have paid versions of their tools. And it seems like the standard monthly fee is about $20 across these different platforms. So there's a significant performance difference between the free versions of things and the paid versions of things. So how that can be problematic within the higher ed context is it creates some digital inequities. You know, maybe your Pell eligible students will be using the free tools to help them with their learning or to help them, you know, with the array of different tests they might be using Chat GPT or a generative AI tool for. And then your more affluent students are going to have access to Chat GPT-4, which that could have a negative impact or at least create segmentation within student performance where two students who are sort of like equal from GPA perspective and SAT perspective or all of those kinds of things, that they're essentially fairly equivalent students. But if one has access to a paid tool that does so much better than say the free tool, and then another student is sort of saddled with the free tool. So this is a challenge for higher ed. It's like, how do we level that AI playing field? And there's been studies that have looked at performance between the free version of ChatGPT and GPT-4 and looking at GREs and the AP tests that students take in high school and SATs and the like. And, you know, there's performance from ChatGPT 3.5. And then when you compare it to 4 does so much better. So there's definitely a difference. So as you think about your own experience with generative AI, if you've used the free tools in the past, and you may have been frustrated with what you received from those free tools, it's because they've literally, when OpenAI came to market with ChatGPT-4, they literally dumbed down 3.5 so that people would be frustrated with it and then pay to gain access to 4. I definitely lived through that cycle of things where the free version just seemed to get worse and worse and kind of argue with me or just give really poor responses. So if you've never paid for access to one of these AI tools, I would recommend like take a month, subscribe for 1 month, and then like, well, number one, give it things from your own class, like your own writing prompts and the like, but then also use it in place of a search engine. I mean, not if you're looking for movie times this evening on a Friday night or whatever, but for other reasons why you would typically go to a search engine, maybe try to use the paid version of ChatGPT-4. I think you'll begin to see the difference in performance. But again, it's also something that we higher ed need to grapple with as we want to, you know, make sure our courses are as fair as possible from one student to the next. So back to this notion of that tension. Well, what are some of the strategies we have to kind of negotiate this grand challenge of, you know, well, students could cheat with it, or it could diminish their learning, but oh wait, we also need to bring it into our classroom. So how do we do that in a way that doesn't negatively impact student accomplishment of learning outcomes that we've had for them previously that have nothing to do with AI? So how do we negotiate that space? So I mean, one approach is that we could just ban it, right? We could just say we're not going to use it at all on our campus or within our classroom. The challenge with that is a recent student survey found that, you know, students say, okay, if you ban it, 75% say they're still going to use it. So, you know, we haven't had a lot of great success with banning technologies anyways, like cell phones, which has kind of had a recurrence this lately, especially in K-12 settings about banning cell phones. But, you know, whether it's banning Wikipedia or banning the web a couple of decades ago or banning cell phones in the classroom, you know, that we don't have a great success record. Those are difficult things to ban whenever the students themselves see so much value in it. When you sort of wonder, well, how many of our students are actually using it at this point? 2 months after ChatGPT came to market, so January 2023, 89% of students said that they had already tried it at that point. So almost 9 out of 10. I haven't seen another student survey since then that was as high as that first one, 2 months after generative AI kind of hit the landscape. In fact, I saw one on one particular campus where only 22% of students admitted using having any knowledge of ChatGPT. I think at this point it's kind of the third rail, right? Like, you know, it's perceived of as possibly a tool for cheating, so students don't want to admit that they're using it. But minimally, in all of our courses right now, there's some percentage of students that are leveraging generative AI for an array of different purposes, not necessarily cheating, but they might be using it for a variety of different ways. I think it's probably well north of 50%, probably north of 75% of all of our students in all of our classes are indeed engaging with generative AI tools at this point. So if we go a little bit further with this notion of it's cheating, I mean, other strategies we have available to us, proctoring or going back to oral exams if our class sizes would allow that. There's also blue books, and then there's just sort of broader surveillance approaches. My son Carter, he came home this past spring, and I was doing the dad thing, so hey, how was the semester? How did you do on your exams? And he's like, everything went great, but I had this weird thing. My professor made me go to the bookstore and buy like just a few pieces of paper with staples in it. And I said, was the cover blue? And he said, yeah, how do you know? And I would just sort of thought back nostalgically about things that I had to do whenever I was an undergrad. And I remember the blue books very well. So those have made a recurrence. And I do think these strategies and more all have a place in our new AI landscape in higher education. There's times when we want to see what students can do without the technology. We're trying to teach foundational skills, and you can't you can't collaborate with AI until you have some skills to be able to review the AI's work, minimally, just to be able to review AI's work. So there's times when proctoring of exams is the appropriate strategy, where oral exams is a good idea. Blue books make sense as well. So I think these are among the tools in our toolbox as we go forward. There's another tool out there that is known as AI detection. It's kind of like a magic bullet, an all-seeing bullet that can hopefully accurately detect whether or not a student used AI to complete work. The problem is this is a really fraught space. I mean, number one, there's independent studies that have looked at these tools, and we're finding that the accuracy varies considerably from one tool to the next. Some of them are as bad as a flip of a coin. So that's really a problematic notion, is that we might falsely accuse a student of cheating with AI. People ask me, do AI detection tools work? And I say, well, they work better than us. There was a couple different studies of faculty reviewing AI-produced papers and student-produced papers, and we were able to guess correctly 56% of the time. That's not a great record for us. And I've done this as well. Me and a friend, we did 5 papers, and we wanted to see if we could tell which was which. And neither one of us did that well. I did below 50%, which I thought I would get all but one right. But my friend, he did better than 50%. But so we're not real good at humans aren't real good at being able to tell. I think it gets easier if we had a class of papers. We took up 25 papers in a freshman comp class, or a class that had a writing assignments. And if we started to sort of hear or see similar structures and forms across 5 or 6 of the papers, we might kind of cluster those together and go, this is kind of very similar. We might be able, with that larger context, to get a little bit better at discerning if it was produced by AI. But if you go on to Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and you look at students and you kind of do searches for, what are some ways you can fool AI detectors? There's a whole mythological landscape out there. And like one of the myths that's out there is, well, you know what? AI doesn't make typos. Just stick some typos in there, and AI detectors won't catch you. They won't accuse you of cheating. And there was a study that looked at all of those myths, and yeah, that actually works. Put some typos in there, and AI detection doesn't work as well. Changing some of the wording. There's an array of different things. Paraphrasing what the AI wrote. Those things all diminish the chances that AI detectors will catch you. This was a study from March of 2024. But maybe the bigger question is how big, what is the scope of the problem? Like how big of a problem is this? And there is some data that would provide us with some sense of understanding of that particular question. So the biggest tool in terms of market share in the AI detection world is Turnitin.com. Many campuses have it as a plagiarism detection tool, but in April of 2023, they launched their AI detection tool, which is packaged with their plagiarism tool. And this past April, a year after they came to market, Turnitin heralded, the success of their tool. They said that they had reviewed more than 200 million papers just over the last 12 months. And of those 200 million papers, 22 million were flagged as having at least 20% AI produced writing. So what's interesting about that is that's only 11% of the papers that turn it in reviewed. So that's not, I've been on campuses where people have told me, well, I think all of my students are cheating with AI, or half my class is cheating with AI. I really hear AI's voice. That's probably not accurate. I mean, if we put some sense, like I would think that Turnitin would want to elevate numbers. So I think this is probably in the ballpark that probably in a class of 30, maybe 10% are turning in AI produced work. So, a class of 30, that means 3 students. That's a very different kind of cheating problem than if it was 20 out of 30 students were cheating. And there's a lot of research regarding what we can do, nudges we can put in place within our courses that can diminish students cheating. But I think there's some gray area right now regarding what exactly constitutes cheating. Like I think most of us would agree if a student asks an AI to write a paper for them and then they turn that into us and represented it as their own work. That seems like cheating. Most of us would go, yep, that's cheating. But what about if students ask the AI to produce that outline I talked about earlier? So it produces an outline and then the student writes every word and then turns it into you. Is that cheating? Probably would diminish learning, but is that, cheating? Or what if the student wrote the paper his or herself and then gave AI the paper and said, here's the writing assignment and the grading rubric. I need to get an A on this paper. What changes should I make to get an A based upon the grading rubric? And so then the AI gives them, here's 7 suggestions, and the student makes those changes to their paper, and then they turn it in. Is that cheating? Students aren't sure, but I think ultimately what we might call cheating in higher ed, business is now calling progress. They're often requiring, hey, don't take all the time to write a draft yourself. You can save 30 minutes if you have AI do a draft of the press release and you just edit it. So if that's what the world of work is demanding, does that mean we need to think about how do we prepare our students to do that kind of work well? We still need to teach them the foundational skills that pre-exist the existence of AI. But how might we approach this? How do we move forward into this new space? And I think part of it is the notion of providing clear policies. I think most institutions are having task forces at this point that are focusing on writing like a university policy. They're usually pretty broad and as a result, somewhat vague. I think many of us are putting AI policies on our syllabi. But I think one way to kind of negotiate that tension of we need to train students to use AI, but we also need to keep AI out for some things might be going forward for almost all of us for every assignment to have an AI policy that would vary from one assignment to the next. So, on this particular assignment, you're allowed to use AI and these 3 tools are recommended or whatever it is, or this is the process you use, you adopt to use AI. I think a key thing is like if we're going to say you can't use AI, we also need to answer the question for the students of why. Okay, you can't use AI for the first 10 weeks of the semester because you need to develop these foundational skills. But as you develop these skills and can be a real partner with the AI, the last couple of assignments of the semester or the term, you're going to be able to leverage AI to complete those assignments in some very specific ways that mirror the real world. So that's why you can't use AI right now. Because you have to develop these skills because without them, so that's the kind of things that we need to tell our students. We also would probably in some assignments want to say, must they disclose their AI prompts or the entire script, the back and forth, what AI told them back? Like, should they turn that in? How should AI be credited if they're using it? Should it be an acknowledgement? Should it be like in a citation list? Also educating students about the limitations of AI, when it doesn't work well and being transparent about that. So there's a lot we can do just within the policy, just within the communication domain to help our students be prepared to do the work that we aspire for them to do. But sort of pivoting back to AI detection, when Turnitin came to market, they said that there was only a 1% false positive rate. So kind of unpacking that a little bit, that meant like out of every 100 students that turn it in would say the student used AI, only one would be falsely accused of cheating. And some institutions sort of like, begrudgingly said, okay, well, we don't like collateral damage, but we don't have any other options available to us, so we're gonna move forward with it. But then about 4 months after Turnitin came to market, they then released a press release of sorts that said, we said 1%, actually it's 4%. So when we went from 1 in 100 falsely accused to 1 in 25, many campuses said, we can't use this. That's too much student collateral damage. So Vanderbilt, Michigan State, UT Austin, many others said, we're not using AI detection on our campus anymore. Other campuses kept going with it though. But thinking about these numbers from that press release, 200 million papers reviewed and 22 million flagged as having at least 20% AI writing. So 4% of 22 million is 880,000 students from April to April of the past year were falsely flagged by Turnitin as having used AI, which means, probably a number of faculty then moved these students forward. Probably tens of thousands of students went through academic integrity processes that they were entirely innocent of. So that's a real problem. And I think a real problem for a number of different reasons. I mean, right before ChatGPT came out, the American Psychological Association heralded that we have a student mental health crisis in higher education and that campuses needed to rethink their approach to that. I mean, they documented, what they described as massive increases in the demand for psychologists on college campuses. So falsely accusing tens of thousands of students, is that helping the student mental health crisis? It's probably exacerbating it extensively in ways that we don't even fully understand at this point. So that's one real problem with using AI detection at all. But there's a bigger challenge too. I mean, there's been a decline in Americans' confidence in higher education over the last 10 years. It continues to fall, and also regardless of someone's political orientation, it's declining for all Americans. And so as this comes forward and becomes more of the narrative regarding American higher education, we're likely to see more hits to Americans' confidence in higher education. Right now, it's on par with the American presidency, like the confidence in that American institution, higher education, and the American presidency are equally, there's equal amounts of no confidence, if you will. I think that's a sentence. I almost got there with it, but you get my point. So I feel like it's damaging our industry, and it's damaging our students, our choices to use tools that have these false positives. In fact, as we were putting together the book, my mouse keeps double clicking for me. As we were putting together the book, we did quite a bit of student focus grouping. And one thing we heard in every student focus group was really exemplified by this one particular quote from a student. She said, "We're not worried about being caught cheating with AI. We're worried that we're going to be falsely accused of cheating with AI. Everyone knows someone that has happened to." That's what it's like to be a student in higher education today. That's part of the fear cycle that undergraduates experience, is the concern that they're going to be caught cheating. And so there's not only the issue of false positives, it's also the issue of false negatives, like who gets let through. And certainly those that are using the better tools, so in other words, the more affluent students that are paying for subscriptions, they're less likely to get caught than students that are using the poorer tools that have been dumbed down and haven't changed for a year and a half, So there's that issue that creates a socioeconomic concern regarding equity, regarding just the use of AI detection tools, but also students that can afford to pay for subscriptions to tools like AI Humanizer. And this is again within sort of the TikTok and the Instagram student dynamic out there, is students recognize this tool. And so for just $10 a month, you can have a paper that you wrote for your final exam, that you didn't write, that AI wrote, you could have that turned into humanized text that would score 0% in an AI through an AI detection tool. So it's just another reason why probably AI detection isn't a good approach for us. I guess ultimately, I believe that right now, today, this moment, this is the worst generative AI is ever going to be. It's only going to get better at writing like us. I can give it 3 writing samples from me and it will write like me. I can say, write like me, use my idioms, I write in the passive voice probably more than I wish that I did, but like write like me. AI can generate a text, write an op-ed on this topic using my voice and my idioms and all of those things, and it can do that quite well. So as a result of AI likely getting better over time, probably right now today, this is the best that AI detection will ever be. It's probably going to have a really difficult time keeping up, and it's already a bit of a train wreck. So this is one solution that I'm encouraging people in higher ed not to keep in their toolbox. I think ultimately I ask a number of questions of those that are considering it, and I say things like, well, if you're not willing to be transparent on your syllabus regarding the range of concerns regarding false positives, if you're not willing to be transparent with your students about these issues, you probably shouldn't use the tools. In fact, there's been a number of cases where students have lawyered up for being falsely accused of cheating. There's one case that probably the most well-known case was at the University of North Georgia. A student lost their scholarship as a result of what she says is a false accusation of cheating. She was given a 0 in a course at F and, mark on her transcript and all of those things. And her GPA fell below a threshold where she lost her scholarship. And she's been very public. She has a big Instagram presence, and she also was on Dr. Phil this summer being interviewed. So when you think about how this notion of being falsely accused of cheating, how much has that become a part of the fabric of American society? It's gotten out there. If Dr. Phil is talking about it and doing specials on it, then it's a large national concern. So again, maybe this isn't the solution. So what are some of the other strategies we have available to us? Well, one is that if we thought about evoking AI into the classroom, maybe we then have higher expectations. We actually, maybe for a freshman level class where maybe we would never have asked students to engage in some more complex tasks, we might say, yes, you can leverage AI, but the expectation is you're going to be completing work through that partnership that's higher on Bloom's taxonomy. A little pyramid thing here is Bloom's taxonomy, where the bottom of the pyramid, the foundation, these are like core things that are lower level learning outcomes, like just remembering something or understanding something, or sort of lower level learning outcomes. But higher order learning outcomes are being able to analyze like data or a setting or output from an AI, or to evaluate and make edits associated with the evaluation that you made. Maybe we push students higher on Bloom's taxonomy whenever we allow AI into the room. Maybe our assignments will begin with use AI to produce a draft, and then your job is to improve the quality of that draft. And then you turn in both. This is what AI produced, and this is what you were able to do to improve that document, and based upon and leveraging the skills I've been teaching you for the last 7 weeks of the term. So that's another approach. Or having students do more sort of meaningful or real world kinds of assignments. And sometimes it's hard for us to think about, well, how do we write these new assignments? And AI, we can leverage AI ourselves to help us do that kind of work. Like one thing that I did recently was, so thinking of generic assignments that focus on this learning outcome, for a sociology class, what would an assignment look like that leveraged AI but could not be completed entirely by AI? Those kinds of questions we can do. So a range of other things we can do, like suggest 10 ways to make this assignment more motivating, engaging, or relevant to students interested in X topic during basketball season from Southern California, majoring in whatever. You can put in those variables and it will create examples and work that that hits that target. I mean, sometimes I think we're so close to our disciplines, we can't get away from our own language. There was one class that I was teaching. It was a doctoral level statistics course. And I had a student in the class, as I was sort of lecturing and explaining, and she was just getting more frustrated. She sat right in front, and she finally raised her hand and said, I'm completely lost. Could you explain that again? And so I explained it again using the same words that she didn't understand the first time. And I could tell that I wasn't reaching her. But then the student sitting right next to her said, no, no, no. It's like that Beyonce song where X, Y, and Z, and everyone's nodding in class. And I was like, what just happened? You know, so going to AI, like if there's times in our courses that we've taught, if you've taught the same course maybe for 6 semesters, and you know where students are struggling, and you've tried to adjust your pedagogy, maybe go into AI and say, I'm not reaching my students in my criminology class. They really struggle with this concept. They're almost all from Orange County or whatever. How might I change my examples to better meet their understanding of this topic? So we can find ways to really leverage AI to help us better reach our students, especially when we know where they might be struggling, and if we know where not only where they're struggling, but where the sort of the tension points are within the class. How can we reach those students? So I mentioned at the very beginning this notion that AI is changing the very definition of average. What is average work? And I really think that a student who graduates today being able to write at an average level, at a C level, is far less valuable than the student who graduated 3 years ago being able to write at an average level, largely because AI can produce work that is fairly average. My co-author Jose and I, we wrote a book together 7 or 8 years ago now, and in it we had a grading rubric for writing, and this is a chunk of that rubric, the higher end of the scale. So, anyways, we had AI respond to some of our own assignments from from courses in the past, and we found that it was producing work that, if that was turned into my class and I was using this grading rubric to grade that assignment, it would have scored a C. And it was pretty consistently producing work at the C level. So if AI can produce C level work, is a C still a C? If we evoke AI into the class, we tell students they can leverage AI for this assignment, maybe what was once C level work is now F level work. That's a 50. If AI produced that work and that's as far as you got with it. So then the expectation, if you want to use AI, you need to then do something to make it good or even great, at the B level or the A level. So maybe the old B minus is now a D. The old B plus is maybe a C or C plus, So I think if we're evoking AI into our courses and allowing students to use it, I think it disrupts our previous grading scales. So, yes, Carmen.
I just have to say, this is making me think about how to improve the culture of quality for students. So students still use lowercase I when they're doing certain writings with emails. They've started that from the texting, and I've been trying to figure out how to make you care to use the to use grammar properly. And yeah, if I just elevate everything to a level and say, I know you have the tools to do this accurately, and now I need you to care to actually produce grammatically correct writing. I don't know. That gave me a little bit of hope. I just wanted to share that. It
Oh, I'm
was
glad
hard to
that you
type
did.
that in the chat, but I just
Yeah,
to
I think it's
share that,
as
elevating it.
we kind of get under the hood of working with AI or its implications for a classroom, it's like I think that cheating is, like a 10% problem rather than the 90% problem. There are all of these other components that begin to kind of unfold like an onion. It's really about kind of course redesign and curricular redesign. As we think about where do we allow AI in, again, to prepare students for the world that awaits them. But we also need to still have them learn the things we've previously taught in previous courses. So how do we do that? And then it's like, well, it's not just which tool to use, but then what does the assignment look like? What does the grading scale look like? What is fair in terms of grading in a new context where you allow AI in? There's just so much to kind of think about. So I've got a little bit of a laundry list of strategies I want to share with you before I open it up to Q&A. So there are a number of strategies that research has shown us with college students that will positively impact their decisions whether or not to cheat. So again, within the context of, in a given class, it's maybe 10, 11% of students that might actually choose to turn in AI produced work. That's, 3 students. If we use some evidence-based strategies, we might move in a class of 30 from 3 students that are cheating with AI to 2 to maybe just 1. And to be honest, cheating has always existed, and it's always going to exist. And I don't think any of us got into the careers that we're currently in higher education thinking, I want to be a police officer. That's not why we're teaching. That's not why, we moved on with higher degrees and all of that. So I don't know if it's the best use of our time focusing on the 3 that are cheating rather than the rest of the class. I mean, I remember whenever I was in my very last final exam as an undergraduate, it was a 4,000 level statistics class. And I looked over to the person to my right, and he had his foot was on his knee. And I could see on the side of his tennis shoe, he had every formula known to man written on his shoe. So whether technology is in the classroom or not, that's going to occur. But with that said, there are things we can do. And I think I'm less concerned about that student who's always going to cheat. I'm more concerned about the students in the middle, that really don't want to cheat and wouldn't cheat, but there are other pressures that might bring them to that. So anyway, some of the things that we know that work. One is to talk about academic integrity to our students. The way that I used to talk about it in my class is when I got to that part in the syllabus discussion on day 1, I would I would move to talk about integrity writ large. Like, when is integrity important to you in your life? And students will invariably say, well, where I work, it's really important. We have to do certain kinds of tasks, and it's important that we're honest. And or in their romantic relationship, integrity is important, or in their family. Everybody has lots of different stories. And I say, well, I want to extend that notion of the rest of your life and how important honesty and integrity are into this classroom. And so I don't want anyone to have an unfair advantage. I want this to be a very fair classroom. I think we all agree that that's important. So I'm going to be talking to you a bit about when you can use different tools, and I really need you to follow those instructions. Research shows that when you talk to your students about academic integrity, especially in kind of an affirming way rather than, I'm out to get you kind of thing, it will decrease the chances that students will cheat. If I have that discussion, let's see, today is Friday. If I had that discussion on Monday and my students had a test on Wednesday, it would have the desired impact. If I have that discussion on Monday, September 8th or 9th or whatever it is, if I have that discussion on September 9th and then they take the midterm on October 30th, it's as if I never had that discussion. There's a decay associated with sort of like the persistence of that conversation. So what that means is if the midterm's on October 30th, then maybe on October 28th, I bring back up the notion of academic integrity and how important that is. And maybe I even give an integrity quiz, like, when is it important to have integrity, and then talk about it being, again, connected to the class. And then as a result, for that final, instead of maybe 3 would have cheated, it would now be 2 or 1. There's some other strategies that actually help not only diminish cheating, but also improve learning. And I guess my favorite from this list is just the notion of us being flexible. Let's suppose that you're teaching a class that has a bit of writing in it, and you have 5 writing assignments due, at different points in the semester. What if you had on your syllabus that, okay, you've got these 5 writing assignments. For any 3, you can have a 2-day extension, no questions asked, and no grade penalty. Just send me an email and say, hey, I need the extra 2 days. What that will result in is that instead of the student who has mismanaged their time, or really didn't feel they had the requisite knowledge to do that project well, instead of them deciding, well, I've got to cheat because I don't have time, I got to get some sleep, I had to work all weekend, now I've got a project due Monday morning, I'm not ready, all the reasons why, and good reasons why, students feel like they can't do the project, and then that might lead them to cheat. If they then had that get out of jail free card, where they could say, hey, give me 2 more days, then they're more likely to do the work, and they're less likely to cheat. And ultimately, every assessment we give our students is an act of pedagogy. So, whether we give them a multiple choice test or a writing assignment, or we have them build a presentation, there's a lot of learning that takes place in what we ultimately assess and put a grade on. So it's about learning and assessment, like just having some flexibility built into your syllabus will diminish cheating and improve learning. I mean, when they're actually grappling, those that do the work do the learning, and anything that we might put in place that could help students make the right decision and actually engage with the work is going to have our desired outcomes of, more learning, less cheating. All right. Well, I'm just a couple of minutes past where I hope to be, but we still got over 10 minutes for Q&A. I'm going to stop actually sharing my screen so maybe I can see everybody on the screen. Feel free to just unmute yourself or to come back on screen if you'd like, but love to just answer any questions you might have or anything else that you'd like to talk about. There's lots of topics certainly within the AI world that I did not discuss, but I'm more than happy to answer any questions you may have. Or maybe I spoke with unbelievable clarity for a Friday. Maybe
Now,
that's
I have a question. This is Wiley Brown. What about, has anyone tried incentivizing doing your own work? So, for example, saying to a class, if you want to use AI, you can, but if you do your own work, I'll give you 20 extra points or something like that.
I don't know that I've heard of that. I don't know that I've seen that in the academic integrity literature. It'd be hard to imagine that someone hasn't tried strategies like that, but I just don't know that I've seen that in the literature. But that's a very interesting idea.
Yeah, because otherwise, the approach that you presented puts the student in a sort of psychological negative box when they get to the workplace. Because if you're feeling guilty about using AI and you get to work and you're expected to use AI,
Yeah.
now you're conflicted in your own consciousness about using the AI. And so that's just one of the potential downsides of, associating AI with something negative.
I think you're right. I mean, we have thus far in higher ed, I mean, this is generalization for sure, but we've fairly demonized the usage of AI, and now we're kind of turning the corner where we see the world of work has changed so dramatically that it's like, well, we can't have a wholesale ban. We need to figure out how to incorporate it in, but there's still a stigma associated with it. And we see that in the student surveys, right? Where most likely nearly all students have had some experience with generative AI, but they're not willing to admit it when surveyed by their university or by their faculty members. So it's like, I mean, there's already this fear of it, and also with all the false positives and that there's this whole culture of like, among undergraduates, that it's a troubled space. This is something that if you use it, you're cheating, or you're doing something illegal, or you're doing something wrong. And again, the world of work kind of sees using AI as not cheating, but they see it as progress. They see it as innovation. And in many contexts, it's being required. There was one student that we talked to during the focus group about probably 10 months ago. She was sharing a first-gen student going to college part-time, taking a class or two at her local college semester after semester. She's about 27 years old. She was working at a kind of a mom and pop small business, and she was like the office manager person. She did everything. She did invoicing and would go to the bank and put things in the bank, and she just did everything. But she also wrote press releases and did emailing and correspondence. And her boss, gosh, a year and a half ago, had discovered ChatGPT and said, "Hey, look, I need you to stop wasting so much time writing these things from scratch. You've got this tool. Now just start everything with that. If you've got an email that's going to take you a while, start with ChatGPT. All press releases start with ChatGPT." Same semester, she's taking a business writing class to help her get better at what she knew was a weakness. Her business writing professor said, "You may never use ChatGPT." And she's like, "How are you preparing me for the real world? My boss tells me I have to, and you say I can never." And so she was like, "Why will I ever take another college class when there's such this huge disconnect between higher ed and what's really happening in the real world?" of course, there was a conversation that faculty member did not have with the student. You know, whenever she was saying you can't use it, the next thing that needed to be said or communicated is, and the reason you can't use it is because you need to develop these foundational skills. I mean, you have to have skills before you can use the AI. And so that's why I'm keeping it out of my classroom, is to so that you will, you know, so those kinds of conversations, whenever we do decide to ban it on an assignment or in a course, need to be made transparent to students. Otherwise, there's going to be this, well, could be a stigma or just significant frustration, you know, from the student. Like, why am I here if you're not preparing me for what I'm hoping to do in with my career in the real world? But thanks for your question. I see there's another hand up, so please go ahead and unmute.
Cool. Hey, thanks, Eddie. Really quick question. I'm not sure if you teach in the district. I know, Stephanie, you responded in the chat. Does anybody know if within our districts of the LACCD that we have access to any AI tools? And the reason why I ask this, Eddie, and also everybody else, is because I'm an advocate for AI, but my issue as an educator is that if students use ChatGPT or Google Gemini, there is no way for me, the instructor, to moderate how students are using the AI tools ethically or even correctly. So as an educator, I need an AI tool that gives me access to see how students are using it outside of my classroom. So would anybody know if there's a tool that we can use for that?
So I'll let Stephanie answer in a second, but if you do a Google search, it's just within the last month that NVIDIA, which is the big giant chip maker that enables the performance that we get to with generative AI, they entered into their first agreement with the state of California, and in the press release that I read, there's a focus on the California community college system. So I don't know how that's being enacted, but it seems like Stephanie can tell you what's happening right now, and she may know about the future as well. But it seems like this may get you what you're desiring and what's really needed. I think the California community college system is going to be the model for really all other states to follow. But Stephanie, do you know how that's unfolding, or have you heard about that?
I have not heard about that, but I think that's something we need to all ask and inquire about, but I'm not aware of it.
Right.
We can look that article up and find out about what's going on, because we are the California community colleges. So that sounds like good news for us, that they're actually acknowledging it and realizing that we need access to those tools along with our students. So we need to find out. We can ask questions.
Actually, I'm doing some fast Googling in the background, and I haven't read what I'm just posting. But it's from the governor's office in California. It says California NVIDIA launches first of its kind AI collaboration. And again, I haven't read this, but I'm actually gonna do a quick search for community college. Especially in community college, the blue box on the screen, you know, that has a one sentence summary, says especially in community colleges, new state initiative. And I'll post that text into the chat window as well. But yeah, I can't wait to see what you guys do. I mean, this is super exciting, and really the direction that all of higher ed needs to go. Mississippi's got some really interesting stuff that they're doing. There's some other places out there too. Carmen, I see your hand again.
I was just going to say, it's bringing up the real challenge between face-to-face and online classes. So with my face-to-face class, I sort of incur, especially writing research papers. So I have to read all of them. I don't want to read crappy writing. There's no need to submit crappy writing. That's what I tell the students. So I'm encouraging them to use these resources to grade or proofread their work. I'm not their English professor. I'm a research professor. So I think it's easier, however, for me to do that face-to-face. And also to have them take the time to read what they submitted. Students do not want to read words they don't understand. And it helps them to say, I still need to understand sentence structure and vocabulary if I'm turning this work in as my own. And so I employ certain face-to-face exercises, if you will, to help them own their writing, even with the help of AI. Let's improve your vocabulary. Let's look up those terms, because I will randomly ask you to define terms that you submit in your writing. And so then students want to own it and they're like, okay, it's a challenge. It's sort of like what Wiley was saying earlier. It's incentivizing them to improve their writing skills with these resources, but also having them own it. Easier to do in face-to-face. Online, if I can have them come to office hours and sort of do the same thing, much, much, much harder. So I need more help with the online classes. So I just want to put that out there as
I'm glad that you did. Thanks for sharing.
So,
Well, yeah, I
and
was
I
just
just
going
want
to
to
say we're
encourage
about
you
at
guys-
time, but
Yeah, and I just want to encourage everyone to consider joining our community of practice. I will send the links out. The link is kind of long. I can put it in chat, but it's a deep link and I can't get it to shorten. But in our weekly PD updates, if you're not at Southwest and you're not getting those PD updates from me, email me. We're starting on September 18th. I believe it's 3 o'clock or 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a Wednesday. It's a 1 hour discussion, but we're also going to get the books that I mentioned earlier, Eddie's book and his co-author. And we're going to read a little bit more, think a little bit more, because this isn't a final discussion. We know that. I looked at this discussion as seeding new thoughts and ideas and kind of taking us into the reality of where the world is. But we have a lot of work to do, and I'm sure we all feel that way. But if we have to evolve. We have to evolve for our students' sake, and so that what they're getting from us at our college and is relevant to their future. And so we're going to do it, baby steps, a few steps at a time, and eventually, hopefully, we'll look different in the next couple months and year. But if we don't start moving, we're just going to get left behind. But that means our students get left behind. And that is not what any of us in this room want. So please consider joining the discussion so that we can help each other and move forward. And Eddie, any final closing words you'd like to have?
no, I think you gave a great summary. I mean, that's I hear people summarize things that I say. It's like, why can't I say something in just 2 sentences rather than the way that I talk? But thanks again for the opportunity to be here, and I hope it was really helpful. I hope it demystified some things and gave some clear paths for how to maybe rethink or approach some things. But I'm excited that some of you will be reading the book. I hope that you find it valuable as well.
Yes. Okay, Eddie, I have a message for you. I'll send it to you privately. But as all of you go, remember that this, more conversation is there. If you know someone who missed it, we do have a recorded presentation. I may re-air it at a specific time, but have people reach out to me if they're really interested in watching this and knowing this to find out where I archive it so that it's, private in our space, but not out there in the whole World Wide Web, as we said. But it was recorded. So contact me if you're not at LASC. So you'll know how to access it or have another viewing opportunity where I may run that video in another viewing room as a workshop. So thank you and have a wonderful Friday. And Eddie, I'll send you that message really quickly.
Okay, thank you. Are you going to do that via email or in the chat room?
It's in the chat room.
Oh, okay. Let me see.
Since everyone's still leaving. Oh, things popping up on my screen in front of me. Okay. And I see, we just have, hi, Sean Singh. I see a few people I know there. If you have a question for me, let me know. It came
I
up
appreciate that feedback. I really
Yeah,
appreciate that feedback.
I don't, nothing's intentional, but when we feel it, I kind of had a feeling too. So I understood the
Okay.
person in the room who said it, and I was like, oh, when the second, you know what I'm saying. But I know
No,
it's
I
not
really
intentional.
appreciate that because I try to be sensitive to that and try to have diversity in the photos that I share. But I'll go back and double check and have things be more balanced. That's excellent feedback, and I'm grateful for it.
We don't
Yeah.
see things through other people's eyes. That's why we have to talk with each other. That's how we
True.
get better. Thank you
Right.
so much. That was wonderful. Exactly what I hoped for. We have a lot to talk about, and I think the professors get overwhelmed with all the newness. But the students are overwhelmed too, and not all the professors are overwhelmed. I think those who are grasping this faster than others, we need them in the room to help us understand what they've been doing and how they're moving forward. But we have to have the discussion. That's the
Absolutely.
big thing, is we can't ignore it. It's happening. It's been happening. and we have to figure out what we're going to do to best prepare our students. So thank you so much. I appreciate your presentation.